Teachers and editors alike know that grammatical weaknesses are predictable. That is, most writers and speakers make similar mistakes. Some of the blame may go to standard American English itself. Its rules can at times seem arbitrary or confusingly inconsistent. Some of the blame may go to the wide range of regional dialects and media voices that color our vocabulary and syntax, and that lead most of us to think of what is grammatically wrong as sounding right. And some of the blame may go to a kind of laziness that affects all of our communication, that allows us to say and write things without taking the time to carefully analyze the words we use or the grammar that frames them. Wherever the blame may lie for those habitual errors, we need to eradicate them. This week and next, we'll be talking about several common problems that all of us, and I would say especially you as future communications professionals, need to pay special attention to. Again this time, there will be a few pauses during which you'll be asked questions that you can answer on Top Hat for extra credit. As before, when you come to a question or group of them, you can either pause the video and record your answer or answers in Top Hat, then go back to the video, or you can make note of your answers as you go along and record all of them after you've completed watching the lecture material. Just do what works best for you. Also, remember that you can view the video at more than one sitting. Our agenda for today will deal with 4 troublesome matters: comma splices in fused sentences, using the right pronouns, subject-verb agreement, and verb tense usage. Some of the matters that we'll talk about have been discussed in class before, and I'll try not to belabor them. Let's begin. Back in the olden days when I was in elementary and middle school, my teachers were constantly on my back about run-on sentences. That was the name they gave back then to sentences that pretended to be single sentences but which were actually combinations of 2 or more sentences improperly punctuated. Today we divide run-on sentences into 2 groups: comma splices and fused sentences. A comma splice is a sentence in which only a comma and not a semicolon or a comma and a coordinated conjunction is used to separate independent clauses in a single sentence. Here are a few uncomplicated examples. The cat ate the rat, comma, the rat ate the peanut butter. I went into the 2nd grade, comma, I had my first basic lessons in grammar there. She walked all the way home, comma, she shut the door. Register for next semester as soon as you can, comma, get the classes you want. Most comma splices are created accidentally without our identifying them as problems. In fact, you may have seen some in classics you've read through the years, and you may have created 1 or 2 thinking that they were perfectly acceptable constructions. After all, if it's good enough for Hemingway, it should be good enough for me. But the truth is, some of the ways in which punctuation was used a century ago are no longer accepted in standard American English. These days, comma splices need to be avoided. The good news for us as writers is that once we've spotted them, comma splices are easily corrected and seldom require a complete rewriting of our sentence. One obvious thing we can do is break the comma splice in half. Make it 2 sentences instead of 1. Instead of this, register for next semester as soon as you can, comma, get the classes you want, we can write this: register for next semester as soon as you can, period, get the classes you want. Sometimes we can insert a semicolon in place of the comma. Instead of this, I went into the 2nd grade, I had my first basic lessons in grammar there. We can write this: I went into the 2nd grade, semicolon, I had my first basic lessons in grammar there. And instead of this, the cat ate the rat, comma, the rat ate the peanut butter, we can write this: the cat ate the rat, semicolon, the rat ate the peanut butter. Before choosing the semicolon, be sure that the two independent clauses you are putting it between are parallel in structure, share the same subject, or in some other way are appropriate to be so joined. Sometimes we can add a coordinating conjunction after the comma. Instead of, she walked all the way home, comma, she shut the door, we can write, she walked all the way home, comma, and she shut the door. A fused sentence is a sentence that has no punctuation at all separating one independent clause from another. Here are some examples. For our annual picnic, Rupert and Gertrude brought potato salad, we brought hamburgers. This cup has a leak in the bottom, my coffee is seeping out onto my desk. Earl and I listened to the MP3 produced by the new group, neither of us was impressed. I can't find Daisy's cell phone number, I can't get a message to her. Like comma splices, fused sentences are often created accidentally. We start one sentence only to lose track of what we were doing, and we inadvertently finish somewhere other than where we'd planned to go. Or we simply forget to go back and insert intended punctuation. Fused sentences tend to be long enough to extend over a single line or maybe a couple of lines, so spotting them requires patient attention to detail. Again, the good news is that repairing fused sentences seldom requires major surgery. Sometimes, if the parallelism is there already, all that's needed is the addition of a semicolon. Instead of, for our annual picnic, Rupert and Gertrude brought potato salad, we brought hamburgers, we can write, for our annual picnic, Rupert and Gertrude brought potato salad, semicolon, we brought hamburgers. Or we can insert a comma and a coordinating conjunction. Instead of, this cup has a leak in the bottom, my coffee is seeping out onto my desk, we can write, this cup has a leak in the bottom, comma, and my coffee is seeping out onto my desk. Sometimes the fused sentence can easily be made two separate sentences. Instead of, Earl and I listened to the MP3 produced by the new group, neither of us was impressed, we can write, Earl and I listened to the MP3 produced by the new group, period. Neither of us was impressed. Don't forget that we also have the option to do more extensive rewriting. You may find that subordinating one clause to another can make for a more interesting statement. Instead of, for our annual picnic, Rupert and Gertrude brought potato salad, we brought hamburgers, you could write something like this. For our annual picnic, although Rupert and Gertrude brought potato salad, we brought hamburgers. Your professors here and later your bosses will pay attention to comma splices and fused sentences in your writing. Now, though these things may emerge unintentionally, but failing to spot them and correct them is a sign that you aren't taking seriously your responsibility to critique your own work. Be sure to use the time-tested proofreading techniques we've discussed in class, like reading aloud and from bottom to top. You'll be glad that you did. As we've discussed in class, a pronoun's case should reflect its function. If a personal or relative pronoun is the subject of a clause, it must be in the subjective case. If a personal or relative pronoun is the object of a verb, verbal, or preposition, it must be in the objective case. In most constructions, using the correct case comes naturally for native English speakers, but there are a few situations wherein doing so requires thought. Let's talk about those for a bit. Several of you have told me that you're still having trouble with who and whom in adjective clauses. The general rule is this. In adjective clauses, the case of the relative pronoun leading the cause, who or whom, must reflect the role that pronoun plays within the clause. If the clause already has a subject, the relative pronoun cannot also be its subject. Therefore, the relative pronoun should be written in the objective form, whom, as seen here. That is the man whom I spoke to on the phone this morning. Now, I is the subject of the adjective clause, therefore, the objective form, whom, is needed. If the clause does not have another word as its subject, the relative pronoun must play that role, and so should be written in the subjective form, who, in other words. That is the man who spoke to me on the phone this morning. The adjective clause has no other word serving as its subject, therefore, who is used. An easy way to know whether to use who or whom is to substitute the pronouns he or him in their places. If he, the subjective case, makes sense, who is correct. If him, the objective case, will work, whom is correct. Students of grammar usually catch on quickly to the general rule. Unfortunately, not all adjective clauses are as straightforward as those examples we've just looked at. At times, clauses include inserted remarks called asides or embellishments that break away from their central thoughts, speaking directly, usually in some personal way, to the reader or hearer. These asides are sometimes clauses with their own subjects, but they're not considered parts of the adjective clauses in which they may appear. As a result, they can pose pronoun case problems by fooling us into thinking that the relative pronoun should be in the objective case, whom, when it should be subjective, who. Consider this example in which the aside is underlined. That is the man whom I believe spoke to me on the phone this morning. Note how the subject of the aside, I, seems to hide the absence of a subject in the body of the subordinate clause. This would be a correctly worded sentence. That is the man who, I believe, spoke to me on the phone this morning. In the past, commas commonly set off short asides like the one used here, but in recent years, writers and editors have disfavored such comma use. As a result, asides are harder to identify, and the problem I'm describing occurs more frequently than used to be the case. Be sure to look for potentially troublesome asides and to always be conscious of what you're writing when you're writing it. Another type of pronoun problem, and one we haven't talked about yet in the course, occurs with elliptical constructions. I need to explain those before going any further. When a word group leaves out words that the reader or hearer can supply from context, we call it an elliptical construction. A very common example occurs when the subordinated conjunction that is omitted from a noun clause used as an indirect quotation. For example, we might have a full construction that would read this way. The dean said that she would be inviting all students to the celebration. But in elliptical form, it would read, the dean said, know that, the dean said she would be inviting all students to the celebration. Other common uses of elliptical constructions appear in conversation when one answers a question by a sentence composed of only a subject and a modal verb, the main verb being understood. For example, in full construction, we might have this conversation. May we leave now? Yes, you may leave. But in elliptical form, it would read, may we leave now? Yes, you may. Traditional grammar maintains that elliptical constructions also appear in comparisons using the words as and than. Many of these are found in subject complements, specifically predicate adjectives, following linking verbs. For example, here's a full construction. The desert was as flat as a tabletop is flat. The first as is functioning as an adverb, modifying the adjective flat that immediately follows it. The second as is regarded as a subordinated conjunction introducing a dependent clause. Now, in elliptical form, this would read, the desert was as flat as a tabletop. The dependent clause's predicate, is flat, is omitted. Or, here's a full construction. Ellen is taller than her brother Tim is tall. The word than is functioning as a subordinated conjunction, introducing a dependent clause. In elliptical form, this would read, Ellen is taller than her brother Tim. The dependent clause's predicate, is tall, is omitted. Now, in the illustrations just given, traditional grammar regards the words as and than as subordinated conjunctions, and the words tabletop and Tim as the subjects of dependent clauses, whether those clauses are fully expressed or their predicates are omitted. In recent years, that traditional view of as and than comparisons has been questioned by contemporary grammarians, who claim that what have been called elliptical constructions have been improperly named because nothing has actually been omitted from them. These grammarians regard as and than as prepositions when they're not followed by explicitly stated clauses, and they regard the words that follow them as those prepositions' objects. When the words following as and than are nouns, whether one is a traditionalist or a contemporary grammarian makes no real difference. However, when 1, a personal pronoun follows as or than, and when 2, the comparison follows the object of a transitive verb, pronoun case affects meaning. In the following sentence, not containing a comparison, by the way, the main verb drives is transitive and its complete direct object is a large car. Tommy drives a large car. If I describe the size of the car by comparing it to what I drive, I might word the sentence like this, with the personal pronoun in the subjective case. Here's the full construction. Tommy drives a larger car than I do, or than I drive, and in elliptical form. Tommy drives a larger car than I. Alternatively, I might word it like this, again with a subjective case pronoun. In full construction, Tommy drives as large a car as I do, or as I drive. And in elliptical construction, Tommy drives as large a car as I. However, I could not correctly word the sentence in either of the following ways, with the as and than construed as prepositions and the pronoun in the objective case. Tommy drives a larger car than me, or Tommy drives a car as large as me. Rather than comparing the size of Tommy's car to the size of the car I drive, both of these last sentences compare the size of Tommy's car to me. As writers and speakers, we should always say what we mean. Whether or not we anticipate that our readers understand as and than comparisons elliptically, our choice of pronoun case should reflect our aim. Other pronoun case problems occur in compound constructions. When a noun and a first or third person personal pronoun act together as the compound subject of a clause or the compound object of a verb, verbal, or preposition, mistakes can occur. In such instances, when we appropriately place the pronoun after the noun, we often inappropriately opt to use a subjective case pronoun, that is I, we, he, or she, when one in the objective case, me, us, or him, or her is needed, or vice versa. We do this especially in spoken English because the incorrect case sounds better to us. These examples using incorrect pronouns illustrate what we mean. Thank you for inviting Tommy and I to the party. The Smiths and us will be vacationing together this summer. Because Sonia told me that rain was falling, I loaned an umbrella to Anna and she. Paulette and him made a cute couple. Clarence stopped for gas after driving Miranda and I to the mall. Remember, standard American English requires use of the subjective case when the pronoun is acting as a subject, and use of the objective case when it is acting as an object. Thank you for inviting Tommy and me to the party. The Smiths and we will be vacationing together this summer. Because Sonia told me that rain was falling, I loaned an umbrella to Anna and her. Paulette and he made a cute couple. Clarence stopped for gas after driving Miranda and me to the mall. A similar rule applies to compound appositives. When they include personal pronouns, those pronouns must express the same cases as their antecedents. That is, if the appositive is a restatement of the subject of the sentence, any personal pronoun within it referring to that subject must be in the subjective case. If the appositive is a restatement of an object, any personal pronoun within it referring to that object must be in the objective case. Consider these examples. First, an appositive renaming a subject. The pair of us, Roscoe and I, finished our assignment on time. Although the antecedent "the pair of us" contains an objective case pronoun, it is the subject of the sentence, so I is the correct pronoun in the appositive. Here's an appositive renaming the object of a preposition. The professor gave A's to the pair of us, Roscoe and me. This time the pair of us is the object of the preposition to, so me is the correct pronoun. And here's an appositive renaming a direct object. To no one's surprise, the committee nominated its two longest-serving members, Charles and her, to serve as co-chairpersons. Members is an object, so her is the correct pronoun. Remember that the time-tested method for avoiding pronoun-cased errors in compound subjects and objects is to restate the phrase or clause while changing the compound to a simple form consisting of the pronoun alone. So we can do this. Here's the original sentence. Paulette and him made a cute couple. And here's the compound subject changed to a simple form. Him made. And here's the corrected simple form. He made. And here's the correct sentence. Paulette and he made a cute couple. If you're dealing with an appositive, just replace the original term with the appositive and go from there like this. Here's the original sentence with an appositive renaming the subject. The duo, Katie and him, performed every night for a month. Here's the appositive substituted for the subject. Katie and him performed every night for a month. And here's the compound subject changed to its simple form. Him performed. And now here's the corrected simple subjective case form. He performed. And finally, here's the correct sentence. The duo, Katie and he, performed every night for a month. In compounds, grammatically correct pronoun use sometimes seems awkward or unpolished, especially if the errors we're discussing here are habitual parts of our speech patterns. Practice does make perfect, however. Rest assured that over time, testing personal pronoun case can become an almost instantaneous and automatic process, and what at first seems awkward eventually can come to seem very natural for us. There's one more thing to mention before we leave pronouns. What is grammatically correct can seem awkward or even pretentious to us. Sometimes that occurs when a sentence's main verb is a linking verb and the predicate of the sentence renames the subject, that is a predicate nominative using a personal pronoun. In those situations, we tend to opt for what sounds good or is comfortable, and we say and write sentences like these. Hello, it's me. Where's Alan? That man over there is him. Alice had, over time, assumed Cindy's attitudes and even her mannerisms. In some ways, Alice had become her. We have met the enemy, and it is us. Unfortunately, comfort is not a dependable guide to grammatical acceptability. Just as pronouns acting as the subjects of sentences must be in the subjective case, pronouns acting as predicate nominatives, which define, identify, or rename their subjects, must also be in the subjective case. Think of a linking verb as an equal sign. If a predicate nominative were in the objective case, it would not be truly equal to the subject. Unfortunately, subjective case pronouns functioning as predicate nominatives can produce awkward, unidiomatic, and overly formal sounding sentences. Hello, it's I. Where's Alan? That man over there is he. Alice had, over time, assumed Cindy's attitudes and even her mannerisms. In some way, Alice had become she. We have met the enemy, and it is we. I suppose that some might argue that such sentences are good, but only in the sense that they are technically correct. They are unacceptable to both the eye and the ear. Proper pronoun case does not have to be incompatible with fluent communication. When confronted with correct but ugly sentences like those, workarounds are usually available to us. What is acceptable in most cases is an inversion or reordering of the sentence so that the subjective case personal pronoun is the sentence's subject and a noun or neutral case pronoun is the sentence's predicate nominative. Where's Alan? He is that man over there. Alice had, over time, assumed Cindy's attitudes and even her mannerisms. In some ways, she had become Cindy. We have met the enemy, and we are it. In other cases, inversion is not enough. For example, I am it is not truly equivalent to it's me. A better result may be achieved by complete replacement of the original offending sentence. Hello, I'm home. Now let's talk about subject-verb agreement. The general rule is that subjects and verbs must agree in number. That is, a singular subject needs a singular verb, and a plural subject needs a plural verb. Thus, the dog chases the cat, and every spring morning birds sing outside my window. That is true even of the subjective pronoun they when it's used as a gender-neutral pronoun referring to a singular person. As a word, they is always plural, and it always requires a plural verb. Morgan prefers non-binary pronouns. They recognize the current awkwardness of those words, but they are certain that over time, gender-neutral language will become more common. The general rule can get a little complicated when the subject is a collective noun. Although most collective nouns are always treated as singular in American English, we regard some collective nouns as singular when their context describes the group as acting as a unit, but we regard them as plural when their context describes the members of the group behaving as individuals. For example, we would say, to prepare for the new year, the faculty has a retreat in August. But we might also say, as individualists, The faculty are off doing their own things. Some indefinite pronouns can also be a varying number. Consider the word most. Most of the pizza has pepperoni topping, and most of the pizzas were eaten. With these variable number indefinite pronouns, as they're called, the number, singular or plural, is indicated by the number of the objects of the prepositional phrases that follow them. Pizza and pizzas are singular and plural in these examples. Inverted sentences can also complicate things. They require us to keep their functional parts in our heads even though they don't appear where we expect them to be. Look at this example. Struggling in the waves was a small boat. Now, struggling is the main verb, a small boat is the subject, and was is a helping verb. So, de-inverted, the sentence reads, a small boat was struggling in the waves. But perhaps the most problematic issues in subject-verb agreement arise with those sentences that have compound subjects, that is, subjects composed of two or more nouns or noun phrases. In most cases, when we join compound subjects with the coordinating conjunction and, we must use plural verbs. And, you see, creates a construction that includes all members, but not with their forming together a kind of singular entity. Each member maintains its individuality and contributes its number to the whole, so the subject is always regarded as plural, and the verb must be plural as well. 1 plus 1 equals 2. Jack and Jill are going up the hill. The cat and the dog have individual food bowls. But there are a couple of exceptions to that rule. The first is this. When compound subjects are preceded by the words each or every, or a combination of the two words, each and every, singular verbs are needed. Each and every refer to the individual members of a defined set viewed singularly, as they do here. Each cup, straw, and napkin is accounted for. Every house and apartment building in the town has met the latest fire codes. Each and every nail and screw in the house was purchased at the local hardware store. The determiners each and every, when added to nouns, can create an illusion of plurality. That is, they can give the impression that the speaker or writer is referring to more than one of something. In truth, however, they refer to an individual member of a set consisting of multiple members. Another exception occurs when a compound subject joined by and describes a set of paired items that we typically regard as a unit. These include bacon and eggs, breaking and entering, ham and cheese, lox and bagels, peanut butter and jelly, beans and rice, mortar and pestle, at least sometimes, bricks and mortar, and rod and reel, at least sometimes. All such constructions may be regarded as singular nouns, and when they are subjects of clauses, they take singular verbs. For example, bacon and eggs is my favorite breakfast meal. Breaking and entering is the charge being brought against the young thieves. The old chemist's mortar and pestle sits proudly on the shelf in his library. Unless they are part of our everyday vocabulary, combinations like these may leave us puzzled. Are we to consider them as separate things or as a paired set? And how are we to know? Well, a good dictionary can help, and so can the internet. You can look for usage paralleling your own and recognized and well-edited publications as well, like the New Yorker. Remember, if you follow reputable sources, you will be safe. Different rules apply when the elements of a compound subject are joined with or nor, which are often found in the correlative conjunctions either or and neither nor. Although or and nor are coordinated conjunctions, they do not join two equal items, but rather present them as alternatives. As a result, only one element of a compound subject joined by one of those conjunctions counts when the number, singular or plural, of that subject is calculated. With respect to number, the significant element of the subject is always its last, the element closest to the verb. If that element is singular, the verb that follows should be singular. If that element is plural, the verb that follows should be plural. Neither the dogs nor the cats eat the food you buy for them. Cats is plural, so the verb eat is plural too. Either the train or the plane gets us into the city by 6 p.m. Plane is singular, so the verb gets is singular too. In most sentences, the rule stated here poses no problems because the elements of the compound sentence are either both singular or both plural, but when one element is singular and the other is plural, an odd-sounding sentence can result, especially if the plural is stated first. Every evening, either the Warner brothers or Tom lowers the flag. To avoid that strange-sounding syntax, present the plural element last so the verb will be plural. Every evening, either Tom or the Warner brothers lower the flag. Although both sentences demonstrate correct subject-verb agreement, it is best to choose the one with syntax that doesn't sound jarring to your readers or listeners. Sometimes what appears to be a compound subject may not be. Be aware that words and expressions like as well as, besides, along with, and not are not coordinating conjunctions. They are frequently used to introduce asides or embellishments that don't count when determining whether a verb should be singular or plural. Thus, the following sentence is correct. Senator Batson D. Belfry, along with 12 reporters, is, singular, expected to arrive shortly. Some problems of subject-verb agreement occur because of what are called lost subjects. Situations in which the actual subject of the sentence is followed by so many what are called post-noun modifiers. We're talking about adjectival prepositional phrases, participial phrases, or adjectival infinitive phrases, that subject is forgotten and we're led instinctively to have the verb agree with some other noun. Now I'm talking about sentences like this. The assortment of dishes, including odd plates, cups, and saucers, were placed in a cardboard box in the kitchen. Now, although there are a lot of plural nouns before the verb in this sentence, none of them is the subject of that sentence. In fact, all of them are the subject of the present participle including. Now, here's a word to the wise. This illustrates something you should keep in mind as you write. As a rule, subjects are easier to keep track of for your readers and for you as a writer if they're kept short. The longer and more modified the subject, the more likely everyone is to lose it. To check for subject-verb agreement when the subject is complicated by lots of post-noun modification, follow this procedure. Work from the verb backward till you reach the first noun eligible to be the subject of the sentence. The verb and that noun must agree in number. Here's the sentence. A group of yachts with brightly colored banners flying from their masts were entering the harbor. First, identify the verb. It's were entering. Then work backward, eliminating one by one the nouns that aren't eligible to be the subject of the sentence. And when you find the noun that can be the subject, make sure the verb agrees with it. Correctly written, this sentence should read, a group of yachts with brightly colored banners flying from their masts was entering the harbor. Now let's go back to that first sentence that we looked at. The assortment of dishes, including odd plates, cups, and saucers, were placed in a cardboard box in the kitchen. First, identify the verb. It's were placed. Then work backward, eliminating one by one the nouns that aren't eligible to be the subject of the sentence. And when you find the noun that can be the subject, assortment, make sure the verb agrees with it. Correctly written, this sentence should read, the assortment of dishes, including odd plates, cups, and saucers, was placed in a cardboard box in the kitchen. You get the idea. Still other problems of subject-verb agreement occur with what we call existential constructions. Every language includes constructions that indicate the existence of things. In English, these take the form of sentences beginning with the adverb-linking verb combination of there plus some form of to be or its equivalent. There is, there are, etc. These can be deceptive because there resembles to us the demonstrative pronouns that, these, them, and those, so many of us just naturally think of there as a pronoun, and a singular pronoun at that. So just as naturally, we commonly follow there with a singular verb. Keep in mind that the word there is, and always was, and forever will be, an adverb, not a pronoun, and that our existential constructions are actually inverted sentences in which the true subject follows the verb. By now, you should know my favorite existential construction is this. There is a house in New Orleans they call the rising sun. That sentence is simply stating that a house is there in New Orleans that they call the rising sun. House is the subject. It's singular, so it needs the singular verb is. Now, the rising sun sentence is an easy one in that no one would get it wrong. But because, as I said, we tend to construe there as a singular pronoun that is the subject of the sentence, we tend to word the vast majority of our existential constructions in the same ways. Sometimes we start them with there is or there was. Sometimes we start them with there seems to be. Most often we start them with the contraction theirs, meaning either there is or there has, as in there has been. We start with there plus the singular form of the verb. Now, if you don't believe me, I would encourage you to listen carefully to interviews and reports on NPR and to take note of how frequently there plus the singular form of a linking verb begin sentences in which the true subjects are plural nouns. The mistakes are made by guests and hosts alike, and there are lots of them. The only way to prevent them is to analyze our sentences before we utter them, and the analysis has to involve de-inverting the construction. Let's look at a few examples. First, I'm at the library book sale and I see that there is dozens of books on the table. If we de-invert that, we get I'm at the library book sale and I see that dozens of books is there on the table. And we can see that's wrong. Right would be I'm at the library book sale and I see that dozens of books are there on the table. So our original sentence should be I'm at the library book sale and I see that there are dozens of books on the table. Another example. There seems to be odd noises coming from the backyard of the abandoned house. If we de-invert that, we get odd noises coming from the backyard of the abandoned house seems to be there. Wrong. Right would be odd noises coming from the backyard of the abandoned house seem to be there. So our original sentence should be, there seem to be odd noises coming from the backyard of the abandoned house. Now, I'll be the first to admit that analyzing our sentences before we utter them sounds as though it's something we shouldn't need to do. But if you talk to professional writers and speakers, including on-air personalities, you will find that they have learned to do just that. Let's imitate them and get these existential constructions right. Before I wrap up this lecture, I want to say something about verb tense use. If you looked at my scribbles on your first brief writing samples, you may have noticed a note about tense shift. If I wrote it, I was referring to your moving between past and present tense in an inappropriate way. You did that most probably because you didn't understand the implications of the tenses you were using. Misuse of verb tense is as serious a grammar error as any other discussed in this course. It can easily lead to unintelligible prose or worse, a misrepresentation of facts. Because we covered tenses before, and you should know what each of them looks like, I'm not using a lot of examples here. When selecting tenses, remember these simple rules of thumb. Regarding simple past tense. The simple past tense states that something happened or that a state of being existed in the past, that is, before you as teller or writer began your conversation. It is the ordinary tense we use when humans tell stories to one another, and its interpretation does not require readers or hearers to perform any logical gymnastics. Make the simple past tense the go-to tense for narrative. Now regarding past progressive tense. The past progressive tense should be used when indicating that a continuous action or state of being was ongoing in the past at the same time as events you have already described or are describing in the simple past tense. Regarding past perfect tense. Reserve this tense for cases in which you must indicate that an action or state of being was completed prior to something that you've already described or are describing in the simple past tense. Regarding past perfect progressive tense. Reserve this tense for cases in which you must indicate that a continuous action or state of being had been completed prior to something that you have already described in the simple past tense. Regarding the simple present tense. In standard American English, the simple present tense is used for 5 main purposes. 1, to indicate that something is true now, at the present moment. 2, to imply that something is a relatively timeless fact. What we describe in the present tense was true at the time of the events in the narrative. It remains true at the time of the narrative's telling, and it is presumed to remain true at the time of the narrative's hearing or reading. Because the source of their humor comes from the timeless truths about human nature that they express, many jokes are told in the present tense. 3, to generalize. Generalizations differ from factual statements in that the former tend to be expressions of opinion. However, like a statement of fact, a general statement made in the present tense is presumed to be timeless by the person making it. 4, to relate previously published information. If unattached to specific moments in the past, published findings of research speak in the present for those encountering them. Thus, we sometimes use the present tense when explaining the contents of, say, a scholarly article, especially when the research it reports is recent. Research that's been superseded by newer or more reliable studies usually appears in the past tense. Similarly, when retelling a published narrative, even one that was originally told in the past tense, writers and speakers may use present tense. 5, to engage hearers with an oral story. The so-called historical present is useful in spoken storytelling when the teller's goal is to enable hearers to relate emotionally to an event by perceiving themselves as being present when it occurred. As a rhetorical technique, the historical present is far less effective in writing than in speech. Regarding the present progressive tense, this tense indicates that an action or state of being is continuous. It gives no indication of when that action or state of being began or will end. Regarding present perfect tense, although this tense has present in its name, it indicates that an action or state of being was completed at some indefinite point in past time up to the present. It may be used in combination with the simple present tense to provide background information regarding a fact. Regarding present perfect progressive tense, reserve this tense for cases in which you must indicate that a continuous action or state of being began prior to the present and is still ongoing. And regarding future tenses, all of them, simple, perfect, progressive, and perfect progressive, all these tenses refer to future actions or states of being. The future perfect tense describes actions and states of being that will be completed. The future progressive describes those that will be continuous. The future perfect progressive describes those that will be continuous but will reach completion. The simple future gives no indication regarding their completion or continuousness. In summary, most narrative calls for the use of the simple past tense to describe events in the past. When describing background events that occurred or were occurring at some point earlier than the main events of your story, use the past perfect or past progressive tense. Use the simple present tense only for statements of fact and generalizations, and avoid unnecessary shifting from the simple past into the present or from the present into the past within your narrative, especially within a sentence or a paragraph. To improve your use of verb tenses, I'd strongly recommend that you carefully examine a piece of in-depth reporting in a major news source like NewYorkTimes.com or WashingtonPost.com. Note how the author or authors use verb tenses and imitate them. Have a good week. Don't forget to answer the Top Hat questions. Until next time.